5.
Curry hits a three.
4.
Just for the drive. Deep left field.
3.
Patrick hit by Watt. Sack number 10.
2.
Messi with a record-breaking goal.
1.
Welcome to BSS Sports. Now, here are your hosts, Steve and Trevor.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of BSS Sports. My name is Steve Schill with the ever-lovely Trevor Struthers. Blue Jays, shocking news if you have not heard, swept by the A's in a 4-game set. So we're kind of back where we were last week, and the fact that the Jays are still not doing well. However, yesterday, 11-10 win. We were down by a couple of runs going into the ninth. Steve Pearce with a 2 walk-off grand slams this week. What an absolute gentleman. And the last one to do that was Greg Zahn, who, by the way, I have 2 jerseys of. If you want to know somebody who's got 2 Greg Zahn jerseys, it's this guy. I don't know what that says about me, but the last time he did that was back in 2008. So, with that being said, Blue Jays are 49-56, 8 games back of the division lead, 7 games back of the wild card spot, which was, we were kind of looking at the wild card spot for a while. That is kind of out the window at this point. The season, if you will, is kind of out the window for the Blue Jays. At least that's my personal opinion. When you're stuck with the Boston Red Sox and New York Yankees, what are you going to do? Trevor, if you're the general management, what are you going to do?
Well, it's really interesting from the degree of do you sell, who do you try to get rid of before, the offseason strikes. And eventually, with a guy like a Donaldson, too, I mean, he's going to have to get paid. And the time for him is ticking. If it's not going to end up being this year or this offseason, then next year's trade deadline would be that only other chance to move him. So there's that. That's always kind of lingering. And obviously, I mean, the Blue Jays shouldn't be a buyer in this position at all. They should either stand pat with what they have and hope that something happens either later this season or that they can do it next year. And if that doesn't happen, then try to start new next season with the same group and hope that you get better results. Or you can sell and try to move some pieces. They do have some pieces that could go. Joe Smith has been very reliable in that reliever role. And they have a couple of starters, and Marco Estrada, a guy that has struggled at times this season for sure, but no doubt has been one of the more reliable pitchers for the Blue Jays last couple of years, especially in the playoffs. And so a playoff team may look at him for that. And Francisco Liriano as well is a guy that he's about 33 years old, and he can be a reliable 5th starter for a team. That's why the Blue Jays brought him in the first place. And so if a team's interested, they could pick up Liriano there as well.
Now, we're looking at the MLB non-waiver trade deadline today, 4 o'clock. A name that you know, maybe, depends, Melky Cabrera. Not just because of the name, but because he did play for the Blue Jays. Switching over from the Chicago White Sox to the Kansas City Royals. The Blue Jays have not done much in the terms of trading lately. Obviously, we're still at the point where they might do something. Do you think the Blue Jays are going to try to make any deals today?
I wouldn't expect it just because we haven't seen any yet, but that's because, they could be in the works, and that's where Ross Atkins, the general manager's time is being spent, is trying to make these deals, and maybe something does happen before the end of today. Now, the president of the team, Mark Shapiro, did say that they expected to be busy-ish around the trade deadline with some moves, and yeah, we haven't really had any yet, so today obviously would be the day. Obviously, trades can still happen after today, but it is the non-waiver trade deadline. After today, everybody would have to pass through trade waivers. That's where baseball and their trade system gets really kind of confusing. Certain guys definitely wouldn't be able to get through. Other guys would. It would be a lot easier to trade a depth player in that situation, obviously. If somebody picks somebody off of trade waivers, you have to work out a deal with that specific team. So, the non-waiver trade deadline is the last chance for a player to be traded to a specific team without having to worry about trade waivers happening. So this right here would be the day, obviously, if the Blue Jays wanted to get something done, and we'll see if they're able to do so. Like I said, I don't expect them to buy anything. It'll be all about selling at this point.
That's the follow-up point. Feels like the fan base as a whole has kind of accepted that the season is not going as planned, even though the hype train always seems to be with the Jays, at least the past couple of years. Not this year. Sonny Gray with the Oakland Athletics. Yu Darvish with the Texas Rangers. Could be traded. If you remember back when Yu Darvish was coming in to Major League Baseball, we had the talks of, oh my god, the Blue Jays are going to sign him. Of course, they did not spend the money, but the Texas Rangers did. And then Sonny Gray, the only big thing with that is he's from the A's. And who else did we get from the A's? Mr. Josh Donaldson. The likelihood of them going to the Blue Jays, slim, probably, but potential, yes, no, maybe so.
I would say no. At this point, I mean, Sonny Gray is a young pitcher, so if the Blue Jays were to try to pick up a strong asset, Sonny Gray would obviously be on the top of the list. Try to get him into your core of pitchers there with Sanchez, Stroman, and whatever you're going to do with Osuna. But, it seems like at this point it's Yankees or bust. The Dodgers were definitely strong on trying to pick up Gray. But at this point, the Yankees were pretty close as recent as yesterday, but they hit a stalemate. So it's very realistic that Sonny Gray could be a Yankee by the end of the day today.
All right, so switching over to UFC news. All right, so we got this Floyd Mayweather, Conor McGregor fight, all this other thing, super fight talks. Brock Lesnar and John Bones Jones, who ended up winning, which we'll talk about in a second. But the talks of George St. Pierre versus Michael Bisping, I kind of feel like this is like the Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather, where this should have happened a few years ago. I get that Bisping is now a champion. However, I wouldn't necessarily call him in his prime, and especially not with George St. Pierre. Is this fight, which has been said is going to happen between GSP and Bisping, going to sell any tickets? Because I'm a Bisping fan, but I don't know. Maybe from the standpoint that George St. Pierre is coming back. But other than that, I'm not much of this is a real big super fight in my mind.
Yeah, I think it will. And the funny thing about both these guys taking this fight and wanting this fight is they both think it's an easy fight. I mean, that's the funny thing. That's the thing with Bisping that has stuck around with him throughout his UFC championship run that's been about a year now, is it took him so long to win it. Everybody feels like he's an easy fight. He defended the title successfully against Dan Henderson, but Dan Henderson is like 40-something years old. So, obviously that was his retirement fight, Dan Henderson. He was retiring at the end of that regardless of the result. Really what happened was this fight was off after they did the presser earlier this year. It was off at one point. Because GSP wanted it for next year, and the UFC wanted to do it later this year. They were going to give it to Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley had such a horrific fight on Saturday night. He won the fight, but it was such, entertainment-wise, it went so horrifically that Dana White made the decision, along with, the fact that it was probably coming together, and GSP was more interested in this fight happening because he wants the money, that this was going to be the headline fight for the MSG card on November 4th, and that's only rumored at this point that it's going to be happening then, but it sounds like that's where it's going to end up happening is Madison Square Garden, the second card there on November 4th, and this will be the headline fight for the middleweight title, GSP making his return against Michael Bisping.
Now, looking at female UFC, or women's UFC, even though it's technically under the same title, but anyway, Chris Cyborg, UFC champion, TKO win over Tanya Evinger. I love trying to pronounce these names. In round number 3. So, the big question, I guess, is now, okay, so Ronda Rousey had her time. We have Amanda Nunes, and that was about it. I kind of feel personally for the big hype in women's UFC. Now, whether you want to go into specifics for the featherweight division, I don't even know if the females have a heavyweight division, but what do you think the future stars of women's UFC are going to be, or are we in kind of limbo until a new one emerges?
Well, the funny thing about this whole featherweight thing is, obviously Cyborg was the plan to be the original champion. They ended up they needed a main event, basically for a card earlier this year in Brooklyn at, I can't remember, I think it was like around 210 or somewhere around there on the pay-per-view number. And so they ended up putting the featherweight title on the line. Cyborg wasn't able to cut the weight in time, so it was Holly Holm against Durandamine. Durandamine won the fight over Holly Holm, and it was quite a sloppy one. And then Durandamine, she says she's hurt. Maybe she is. She really didn't want to fight Cyborg, is what a lot of people are saying. And Cyborg's dangerous. A lot of people don't want to fight Cyborg. A lot of people are giving Evinger credit to making it the third round against Chris Cyborg. Her striking is incredible. And so she ends up Evinger steps up to fight for this vacant title against Cyborg. That goes down, obviously, this past Saturday, and Cyborg does get the win. She is the UFC featherweight champion, so finally that has happened. And now the struggle becomes of trying to find people to fight her for the title. Now that she has the title, obviously it's going to be more, it's going to create more interest in fighters trying to move up to 145 and take that from her. That's the thing, though. The UFC doesn't have an established 145 division. So they basically have to bring people up from bantamweight. Holly Holm does have a history at 145, and obviously she fought there earlier this year in her last fight. So people are looking at Holly Holm as maybe that next competitor, but they do need to start looking at trying to bring in some established 145ers or create some established 145ers. Obviously, the dream fight eventually would somehow be Nunes versus Cyborg at 145 because both those girls, not only Brazilian, have incredible striking as well. So that would be really entertaining to watch, and that's the fight I'd ultimately be looking forward to with those two down the line. But yeah, until then, finding opponents for Cyborg is going to be very difficult.
That's it for this edition of BSS Sports. Make sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at BSS Sports, archiving all of our works on YouTube at BSS Productions. For Trevor, Struthers, and myself, Stephen Schill, we'll catch you next Monday.
Hold the phone and hold that dial. We are not done yet. BSS continues with the first ever edition, I guess you could call it, of BSS Extra. Steve had a run. My name's Trevor Struthers, so you have me for the next few minutes. But really on the course of that show, we didn't get the chance to dive fully into UFC 214, so I'm going to do that now, really talk about the ramifications of what's coming out of that show. As obviously we mentioned it very briefly, the Brock Lesnar-John Jones super fight potential, that was brought up only really a few days ago. It was, I believe, John Jones doing a Q&A on Facebook. Somebody asked a question about it, and John brought it up on the Q&A, and from there it just kind of speculated. I think somehow it got to Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar commented on it, and then at that point, people really started talking. Could this be a thing that actually happens? And then at the end of the pay-per-view, UFC 214 on Saturday, John Jones picks up a mic and calls out Brock Lesnar, saying that obviously that he would be able to beat him and that he's 40 pounds lighter. And if Brock Lesnar wants to know what it's like to be beat by a guy that's 40 pounds lighter, meet him in the octagon. So there's a chance now maybe we get this fight. It always kind of takes that first initial actual call out in the octagon. John Jones definitely didn't miss that opportunity. He knows what kind of a payday it could be for him to do that. And so obviously now we start talking about when could this fight happen. And a lot of people initially have started obviously thinking, because we don't know dates too far yet now beyond December, but a lot of people have been talking about maybe MSG. Now, that's not going to happen, obviously, because we now know that rumored main event is GSP Bisping for the middleweight title. They're not going to add another super fight onto that card, but what could happen is this could happen in early 2018, and it's not going to happen until then. I believe Brock Lesnar's suspension, I'm not sure which one, because he's got like a UFC one, and then there's the USADA one. It ends in December, maybe January, somewhere in that area. So I think this fight happens February at the earliest, personally. But and that's if that's the next fight out of the gate. Because John Jones, he just fought on Saturday. He's not going to take another fight, defend his title in between time if this fight's going to happen in early 2018. So this could kind of put the division on hold for a bit in that aspect, because then he obviously is going to do that fight and then a little rest break before he defends again, maybe towards the middle of 2018. But, obviously it's going to be a heavyweight fight if it happens, not at light heavyweight. It'd be a lot easier for John Jones to go up to heavyweight instead of trying to get Brock Lesnar down under 205 or down at 205 pounds. So that's not going to happen there. So it'll be a heavyweight super fight, not for a title. But it's still going to sell a lot, and that's why John Jones called out Brock Lesnar. And maybe we get this fight. It would be really intriguing to see this fight just because of who's involved. But personally, Jon Jones really shouldn't have an issue trying to put away Brock Lesnar. I mean, Jon Jones, let's face it, he's the pound-for-pound best guy in the world at what he does. Maybe the best of all time. That's Jon Jones in a nutshell. And my time has basically come to an end here on the first ever edition of BSS Extra. I want to thank you for tagging along for these extra few minutes as I looked at the fallout of UFC 214 and really focused on that super fight potential of Jon Jones, Brock Lesnar. Here's hoping we get that fight. Like I said, early 2018 is the earliest we could probably get it, but if it happens, it's going to be an absolute barn burner. Thanks for listening. Make sure to tune in next week. We're back on the air, BSS Sports, at 2:30 right here on 91X.